Hey guys, I am Venkat and this is part 27 of Web Development with Blazor video series. Syncfusion Blazor DataGrid provides 4 different templates to customize various parts of the data grid. We discussed column and header templates in our previous video, that is part 26. In this video, we'll discuss row and detail templates. In the interest of time, here's what I have done already in the background. In the Pages folder, I added this new component, DataGrid Templates 2.razor. And in this component, we have a Syncfusion data grid. And the data source for this grid is employees property, which is right here. And it is this employee service that calls our server-side REST API, retrieves database data, and populates this property. And these are the list of columns that we are displaying in the grid at the moment. Employee ID, first name, last name, date of birth, etc. So if we take a look at this page in the web browser, we see the list of all employees as expected. Now, here's what we want to be able to do. Display employee photo along with their details like first name, last name, gender, etc. This can be very easily achieved using row template component. First, let's change the width of the grid to 455 pixels and we want to be able to use row template. Here's the important bit to keep in mind. Row template must always be nested inside grid templates component. So first we use grid templates. And then inside this, we use row template. Inside this, we can include any custom content that we want. In our case, we're going to write some C# code as well. So let's include eraser code block. Remember, inside the DataGrid template, we have access to an implicit parameter called context, which we can typecast to employee type. And then let's store it in a variable, name it employee. Now, here's the important bit to keep in mind. In the data grid, we want only one data grid column, and the column header text is Presume Technologies employee list. So here we have list of employees along with the photo and details. So the point is, in the grid, we want only one grid column. So for that, what I'm going to do is leave one grid column here and delete the rest of them. Change width to 450. Let's change header text as well. And we don't need these two properties here. Instead, we want to set text align property to center. Now, here's the most important bit to keep in mind. The content that we want to render inside this row template must be in TD elements. And the number of TD elements that we can have in a row template must match with the number of grid columns that we have. At the moment, we have only one grid column. This means inside this row template, we can have only one TD element. Inside this, we can include any custom content that we want to render. In our case, we want an HTML table, set width and cell padding properties. Inside this, let's include table body, tr, and then 2 TD elements. Now, if we take a look at the output we want, in the first TD, we want employee photo. And for that, in the first TD here, let's include an image element and then set the source to @employee.photopath. If you're wondering what is this employee, well, this is the local variable that we have created right here. And if we take a look at the employees database table, notice we have the employee photo path in this database column. And if you're wondering where are these photos present, well, they are present within our application in the images folder inside www root folder. So as a good practice, let's also set alt attribute to employee photo. Now, if we take another look at the output we want, in the first TD here, we want to display employee photo. And in the second TD, we want another table to display employee details like first name, last name, gender, etc. So in the second TD, let me paste the HTML for a table. We are using two Bootstrap classes for styling, table, table borderless. We have a tr with 2 TDs. In the first TD here, we want to display the label, first name, and then the value for first name. And to get the value of employee first name, we use the employee variable dot first name. Similarly, last name, gender, and date of birth. Here's the HTML for that. Let's save our changes and take a look at the browser. Notice the output is not how we want it to be. And that's because the employee images are too big to fit in the data grid. And obviously, to fix this, we need to include a few styles. We need to set height, width, and border radius for this image element. So let's include a CSS class here. So basically, we are setting the width and height to 150 pixels and border radius to 75 pixels. And let's use this CSS class on our image element. Class equals image thumbnail. There we go. It's much better now. We want to include two more styles. First of all, we want to center align the employee content and then include a border between each employee so there is a clear separation. So for that, on this top level TD element, let's include the style attribute and set border bottom and text align attributes. There we go. We now have a nice border separating each employee. Next, DataGrid detail template. This component is very useful when you have lots and lots of raw data that you want to present. So here's what we want to be able to do. When we initially render the grid, we want to render all the rows of the grid in a collapsed state. Notice we have a visual indicator here. When I expand the row, that's when we display the rest of the details about the employee. In this case, we are displaying employee photo along with the other details like first name, last name, etc. So let's see how easy it is to achieve this using DataGrid detail template. First, in the grid column section, we specify the list of columns that we want to render in collapsed state. In our case, we want to render these 4 columns: employee ID, first name, last name, and date of birth. And then replace this row template with detail template. Just like row template, even the detail template must be nested inside this grid templates component. Now, the rows are rendered in a collapsed state, and when we expand, we see the rest of the details. Notice at the bottom here, we have a border which doesn't look that great. And to remove this, you know the drill. On this TD element, we simply want to get rid of this border bottom style. Now, if you want, you can have all the detail rows expanded on the initial DataGrid load. For that, all we need to do is handle the DataGrid data bound event. So inside this grid, let's include grid events. T value is employee, and the event that we want to handle is data bound. Let's call the event handler data bound handler. Our obvious next step is to create this handler method. Let's do that in the code block. Public async void. In here, all we need to do is on the DataGrid call expand all detail rows async method. To be able to do that, we need a reference to the DataGrid. So let's create a property for that first. sfgrid of employee, and let's call the property employee grid. And then on the DataGrid itself, include @ref. And finally, in the event handler method, on the employee grid, call expand all detail rows async method. This is an async method, so let's await. Notice now on the initial page load, we have all the detail rows expanded. Next, here's what we want to be able to do. At the top of the grid, include this toggle button. If all the detail rows in the DataGrid are already expanded, clicking on the button should collapse them. If they're already collapsed, expand them. So basically, we want to be able to control the expanded and collapsed state of all the detail rows by clicking this button that is external to the DataGrid. First, bring in SyncFusion buttons namespace, include a div element, set padding bottom to 5 pixels. Inside this div, let's include a SyncFusion button, and the tag for that is sfButton. We don't want to hard code the content on the button. Instead, we want to bind it to this property, toggle button content. We don't have this property yet. We'll create it in just a bit. Let's also wire up the onClick event handler, and let's call the event handler toggle button click. Again, we don't have this event handler method either. So let's create both the property and the event handler method in the code block. First, the property. The data type is string and the name of the property is toggle button content. And let's initialize this property to expand all detail rows. Next, the click event handler method, public async void toggle button click. When the button is clicked, we want to do two things. First, check if the content on the button starts with expand. If it does, then we want to expand all detail rows. So we call the respective method on the data grid and then change the content on the button. If it doesn't start with expand, do the opposite. Collapse the detail rows and change the content on the button to expand all detail rows. Now, if you remember, when we initially load this data grid, we already have all the detail rows expanded. So let's change the initial content on the button to collapse all detail rows. Save our changes and take a look at the browser. Notice on the initial page load, all the detail rows are expanded. The text on the button is collapse all detail rows, and as we click the button, the rows expand and collapse as expected. The text on the button also toggles. That's it in this video. Thank you for listening.